Angry reactions after Saudi Arabia executes the largest number of people in one day, 47 convicted of terrorism. Has the Saudi strategy on confronting armed groups changed? Will an iron fist succeed? And what message is the kingdom sending? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Sami Zeidan. Well, Saudi Arabia has executed 47 people it calls terrorists. They include a leading Shia Muslim cleric. Iran says Saudi Arabia will pay a high price for the execution of al-Nimr. Protesters in Bahrain and eastern Saudi Arabia joined the condemnation. Human Rights Watch also criticized the executions. Saudi Arabia says the men received a fair trial.
Our message is clear. The kingdom condemns terrorism and considers it to be a corruption on earth. And therefore we rely on the Islamic judiciary to deal with these kinds of cases. The offenders are condemned to death. The kingdom did not spare any effort to bring terrorists to justice, and we ask Saudi youth to be aware of any plots being hatched to undermine our security.
Well, most of the executed were said to be involved in a series of attacks carried out by al-Qaeda between 2003 and 2006. The Riyadh compound bombings killed more than 30 people in May 2003. The following year, there were 30 attacks, which led to a government crackdown on al-Qaeda and other homegrown fighters. Alongside the increase in arrests, Saudi officials pushed for a new solution, rehabilitation. The program, founded in 2007, provides religious, re-education and psychological counselling for convicted fighters. The Saudi government says it has a success rate of almost 90%. But if rehab is proving so successful, why were so many people executed in one day on Saturday? Let's get the thoughts of our guests into the show now. In Riyadh, we have Ahmed al-Ibrahim, Saudi affairs specialist and security analyst. In New York, via Skype, Leah Whitson, executive director of the Middle East and North Africa division at Human Rights Watch. And in Beirut, Joseph Kechichian, senior fellow at the King Faisal Center for Research and Islamic Studies in Saudi Arabia. Welcome to you all. If I could start with Ahmed al-Ibrahim. Saudi, it did seem, was focusing for a while on rehabilitating people who were convicted of terrorism-related crimes. Do you see a shift in the policy now?
I think it's not a shift, it's a statistics. The number of people that they went to the rehab and they came out of it, some of them actually came out good and fine and they got embedded back in the society. And you have a handful of them, they actually went back and started plotting for terrorist attack outside the kingdom to inside the kingdom and been employed by regional powers within the region. So I think it's not too much of a shift of how these things has been there. It's we're talking about 13 years of terrorist attacks that
But Ahmed, then why were so many people executed in one day then? I mean, if this rehab facility was doing well, it has a success rate, it's been reported of 87%, why have we had so many executions on Saturday?
As I told you, these cases, they go back to 2003. So you're talking about what? About 12, 13 years of criminals that they've been compiled to be executed at the time. Saudi Arabia usually doesn't take things or rush things, especially when it comes to judicial system and trial. Those people has been convicted that they've killed other people. They planted bombs in some of the compounds, and they even planted bombs in Qur'ans. And you know, when these whole pictures actually take a complete picture within the Saudi judicial system, they start implementing these kind of things. And Saudi Arabia has been known that they take their time in order to make sure that convictee is actually convicting with all such crimes. And some of them, they might take a longer time because it actually get attached to another cases that opens another horizon into other cell group and a terrorist cell group to open. So these things are within the margin of the Ministry of Interior. And I think they've done a great job, even though it took a little bit more time. These people should have been executed long time ago, but again, justice has been served today, and we are all glad that justice has been served.
All right, Sarah, can I bring you into this discussion? Do you agree with the analysis? Justice has been done today, is what Ahmed is saying.
Well, I hardly think that justice has been done, first and foremost because of the egregious and excessive use of the death penalty that Saudi Arabia has excelled at. Over 158 executions in 2015, and now ringing in the new year with 47 executions. What we know about the justice system in Saudi Arabia is that it is neither just nor really a system.
Just to clarify, though, Sarah, when you talk about the over 150 executions, some of those were drug-related charges. We're not talking about people, all of those numbers being convicted of terrorism charges, right? Just to clarify.
Oh, hardly. No, we believe and understand the majority of the 158 executions that took place last year to be drug-related charges and penalties. But the most significant aspect here is not just the excessive use of the death penalty, but the fact that the justice system in Saudi Arabia is so deeply flawed as to really make it farcical to consider that there has been any sort of justice served. There's an absence of a penal code. There's a terrorism law that is so broad and vague as to make a mockery of the term terrorism, when merely criticizing the kingdom can make you guilty of terrorism in the kingdom.
Well, what do you make of Ahmed's point there that these cases have gone through years of review and there was a lot of attention paid, that's what the Saudi authorities say, to make sure that those convicted were actually convicted for real events and you know, attacks which they were involved in?
I know that some of these trials have lasted a long time, but not all of these trials were related to al-Qaeda or specific terrorist incidents like the terrorist attacks several years ago. Some of the attacks took place against someone, for example, like Sheikh al-Nimr, who was convicted in 2014 in what we know was an unfair trial. The charges against him were speech-related, like sowing discord and inciting protests. We know that he didn't have a lawyer during interrogation during parts of his trial. We know that trial sessions were held without his lawyer even being informed that the trial was taking place. We know that he had very great difficulty in accessing the charges and the evidence against them. And we know from documenting and examining dozens and dozens of trials in Saudi Arabia that have led to the death penalty, that the way in which these trials are conducted are not serious, are not at the levels of international evidentiary standards.
All right, I could see Ahmed wants to get in there, so I'll give you a chance, Ahmed, before we move over to Joseph. Go ahead.
In Saudi Arabia, if you want to read the law about justice system, you just open the Quran and the Sharia law. This is how we go by, and everybody has to be represented. If you are looking for a trial that O.J. Simpson and all cameras in court, this is not going to happen in Saudi Arabia. We are a sovereign country. We have our own law. We have our own judicial system. We are not going to bind by any other country's law. And Nimr is your focus. I think Faisal al-Shuwail should be also your focus. Nimr has nothing any special over Faisal. Both of them, they are convicted for the same charges, except you are raising the point that Nimr is a Shia and Faisal is a Sunni. So Saudi Arabia does not look
Ahmed, if I can
where
get you
you
to
belong
comment
to.
on,
It doesn't look
can I get you to comment
to
on the process, though? The allegations from human rights organizations that eyewitness testimonies were used to convict people. Some of these were not brought into court to testify, which violates the country's own laws, Saudi's own laws. Preparing for the defense didn't go according to Saudi rules either, in that the legal counsel not being informed of some of the hearings. I mean, you know, I'd like to get your response to that. Is it just a matter of whether international procedure or foreign procedure was followed, or was it a question of Saudi procedure also not followed?
Well, Sami, we are in the kingdom of Saudi Arabia. These people, 45 of them, they are Saudis. We are abided by the Saudi law, and we are a sovereign country. So what's happened in Saudi Arabia, it's done by a Saudi law, which is the Quran and the Sharia. Any other law is not accepted in Saudi Arabia. Or to criticize the Saudi law within Saudi Arabia, or from any regional countries, or from any amnesty out there. What I'm saying about the Saudi law, that everybody who has a question about any of those people, they are very freely available to contact the Ministry of Justice or the Ministry of Interior, and they could go get all the transcript. They could get who represent the criminals, who actually, how many times they get defended, and how many times they get appealed. And actually, just for your information, the judges at the cases, they refused 7 death penalties was raised by the DAA in Saudi Arabia. So it's not anybody who is actually submitting somebody to the death penalty. The Saudi law will put up their hand and said, yeah, let's execute them. No, there is a law, there is a system, and actually it's a slow process. That's why it took us 13 years to execute people who killed innocent people on compounds. I would rather look at and focus on that rather than focusing on whether Saudi Arabia is putting any lawyers and all that, because everything we are follow is by the Sharia system and by the Saudi law.
All right, let's bring Joseph into the discussion. Will these executions discourage people from engaging in attacks in the future? We've already had the warning from al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula last month saying, hey, if any of our members are executed, you can expect some retaliation.
Well, we've touched on so many different issues here in the past few minutes that it is very difficult to actually separate the wheat from the chaff. I think that what is going on is that we have a real problem in our hands. Saudi Arabia, like many of the countries around the world today, faces very serious terrorism offenses committed by al-Qaeda and others as well. And as we've just heard, there is a procedure that Saudi Arabia follows, and it goes to the procedure of actually trying people in court. Sometimes these trials take a very long time and there are repercussions to it. Sometimes the evidence is presented not just to 1 or 2 judges, but it goes to the appeals process and it goes through various steps, 13 in this particular instance of the 47 involved. Sometimes it is rushed through for political reasons. If you put the sum total together, I think that the 158 executions that Saudi Arabia engaged in last year and the 47 so far today really pale in comparison to the challenge that the kingdom faces, because it does have a very serious internal challenge, and it must address this issue to make sure that young people who may be easily assuaged, who may be easily persuaded to follow terrorist routes, do not follow it and
do you
are
think
rehabilitated.
That this will address
we just heard a few moments ago about the rehabilitation problem.
Do you think that these sorts of executions will discourage people from joining groups like al-Qaeda or ISIL or engaging in attacks, is my question.
Oh, no question about that. No question about that. I think that this will not only discourage a lot of young people from falling in these kinds of traps, but it will very much discourage others to make sure that they do not follow. Saudi Arabia means business. When it comes to applying the law, it will apply the law, as we have seen. But it is not a whimsical law. I think that it is important not to fall into the trap. The law is actually quite severe, and terrorism courts go beyond the pale to actually prove, in fact, that the individual convicted of a terrorist crime does receive the kind of steps in the legal procedure where there are appeals and so on. It is not rushed through at all. And I think we have to keep that in mind.
All right, I could see though, Sarah, you were shaking your head. I guess you want to get in on this. The suggestion there that there are many levels of appeal, executions do take a while to go through the judicial system. How do you read that when it comes to fighting the threat of quote-unquote terrorism?
I think that if Saudi Arabia wants to be serious about discouraging violent extremism in the country, it can start by stopping its own violent extremism against its own population. If it wants to discourage groups like ISIS from carrying out beheadings following arbitrary judicial procedures, it can stop executing people with beheadings following arbitrary judicial procedures. I want to invite one of your guests who is rejecting any other law than Sharia and the Quran to join the 21st century and the 20th century and recognize that there's international law, international human rights law that binds everyone in the world, every state in the world, including Saudi Arabia, and that Saudi Arabia has acceded to many international treaties that bind it as well. Second, I want to note that indeed Saudi Arabia is very severely applying its very serious counterterrorism law. But I want to invite your audience to consider that some of the offenses in this counterterrorism law for which the death penalty is applied is criticizing the government, is criticizing the monarchy. That is considered a terrorism offense under this terrorism law. So who in the world can take seriously that this is a serious law under which serious justice is delivered?
All right, I could see, Ahmed, you want to get in on this. Go ahead.
I think the lady that you have in your guest, she needs to get her facts right. I don't think somebody who criticizes the government, actually, they are put in the terrorist list. I mean, the government doesn't, spend their day actually chasing people who just say words. We're a country and we mean business. We're in the business, actually.
Ahmed, there have been cases, though, where bloggers have been put in jail for stuff which they've blogged, though, right? I mean, isn't the line a bit blurred?
There is cases of people. Yeah, but the people has been blogging. They wasn't blogging by saying something about the monarch. Actually, they were saying something about the creation of Allah, or they are talking about the Prophet, which is, this is taboo, as we are a country that will always going to be Muslim country, that we are served for the custodians of the two holy mosques. And Saudi Arabia, they're actually, their constitution is the Quran. This is established, so nothing is going to be done other than that. What I'm trying to say is, what Saudi Arabia has done today and what's been doing for the past 10, 12 years is trying to fight and kill a problem, which is terrorism. Today, those people, if they were on the street, if they were in Yemen, if they were in Afghanistan, they're gonna affect you in Britain, they're gonna affect you in New York, they're gonna affect you in Washington, D.C. By what Saudi Arabia is taking, with the measure that Saudi Arabia is doing today, they are saving not only Saudi Arabia and the Saudis themselves, they are saving the whole world from terrorism. So I think we should nod our head to the Saudi authorities that actually has been taking this cancer away, has been fighting this cancer away, and Saudi Arabia actually has been going through 3 times the event of 9/11, and they are still committed to fight terrorism. So rather than talking about things which is in the air, and comparing Saudi Arabia to, backdated ages, I think you should look and, get busy on countries like Iran, which is they still hang people on the lifts, and other countries like China, which is they execute people just because of criticizing the government. These are the facts. But Saudi Arabia, they only, execute people who is a national threat to the Saudi Arabia and to the world.
All right, I'm glad he kind of mentioned there Iran. Joseph, this is already taking on regional tensions. We're trying to shift the discussion a little broader now between Sunnis and Shias. I mean, we're hearing Iran talking about Saudi Arabia will have to pay a high price. We're hearing from the head of Iraq's ruling parliamentary bloc, Khalif Abdul-Samad, talking about closing the Saudi embassy and executing Saudis in Iraqi prisons. You'd think Saudi Arabia executed an Iranian or an Iraqi today rather than a Saudi national or Saudi nationals. This is something that's transcending national boundaries. Why?
Well, it's very emotional, obviously, and we do have on our hands a serious challenge between Sunnis and Shias. But this goes beyond the politics. I mean, I think that huffing and puffing aside, the Iranians are the last people on earth who should really point the finger, having executed, according to Amnesty International, more than 1,000 people last year, and not just for crimes as serious as terrorism, but as serious as mixing or drug offenses and so on, some of which go beyond anything that we have seen in terrorist cases. Not only Saudi Arabia and Iran, in the region as well. Last week, in fact, the Iranians executed an Iraqi poet for having written a poem, for crying out loud, that criticized certain people inside Iran, and they've executed him as well. So Iranians are the last people who should really point the finger. And of course, there are lots of other countries who engage in applying the law the way their judiciary system is created. Now, the regional repercussions will not go away. This is part of a larger scheme, and there is a real sharp difference of opinion between Saudi Arabia and Iran I don't want to call it Sunni Shia because it is not as simple as Sunni Shia. It is really a political challenge between Iran and Saudi Arabia for regional supremacy. And of course, both Saudi Arabia and Iran are trying to make sure that they cover their bets throughout the region, making sure that these kinds of social issues are not really getting
Joseph,
out
are
of
these
proportion.
the issue, for example, of Shias in Saudi Arabia, perhaps a useful avenue for Iran, is what you're saying, for Iran to exercise its regional and extend its regional influence?
And no doubt about that. And Sheikh Nimr al-Nimr, one of the individuals who was executed, has a long history of anti-ruling family, anti-Saudi Arabia statements. I remember when a few years ago, when at that time heir apparent Naif passed away, he came on television and on social media outlets and criticized them and used really vile language against a senior member of the family. So this is nothing new. Inciting people in the eastern province is nothing new, and the repercussions are very serious, including, and I would like to remind everyone, including when several soldiers were literally burned inside a car when a lot of the demonstrators threw Molotov cocktails on this and executed innocent bystanders as well. So this is a tough issue on our hands.
Right, Sarah, you probably agree this is a tough issue on our hands. What do we know about the others? There's a lot of focus on the execution of Nimr and Nimr. What about the other 46 people who were executed in Saudi Arabia? What do we know about them, their backgrounds, their organizational affiliations, and who they represented and what they'd done?
I think we know very little. The information that we have primarily comes from government sources. There are no independent monitors at these trials. We know that the government has said that many of those executed, we don't have a complete breakdown yet, were allegedly affiliated with al-Qaeda and involved in terrorist attacks in the kingdom over a decade ago. But we do know some of them, at least 4 of them, were Shia prosecuted very recently. Nimr and Nimr, as I mentioned, prosecuted only last year.
When you look into this case, I mean, a point which Ahmed made is that the authorities don't simply go after everybody that is critical of the monarchy. Is it possible to draw some kind of conclusion on that either way by looking at the backgrounds of these people, the 46 others, shall we say? Or
Well, I guess to clarify as a matter of record, in fact, the government does go after people merely because they're critical, and they do it all the time. As you mentioned, we have Raif Badawi, who is imprisoned for publishing his own opinions and his own thoughts, whether on religion or on the kingdom. That is protected speech, and there is no justification for putting people in jail for that. They recently sentenced a Palestinian poet to death for his poetry. There are dozens and dozens of human rights activists, reformers, journalists who are prosecuted and jailed in Saudi Arabia today.
Ahmed's response to that was that those are not people who were criticizing or represented a threat to the monarchy.
That's not true. That's actually not true. And you can go back and read our extensive documentation of these cases. There are many, many, many lawyers, reformists, activists who have been jailed merely because they criticized the monarchy, merely because they called for reforms, merely because they sent letters to the monarchy asking for reforms and change. This is not just about criticizing religion. That's a thin excuse. And by the way, criticizing religion is the right of every human being anywhere in the world, including in Saudi Arabia. There's no justification for putting people in jail merely because of the speech and the words that they utter, as long as it doesn't specifically call for violence. That would be the only justification.
Ahmed
and I would point out that one of the people who was sentenced to death and killed today, Nimr al-Nimr, was prosecuted for his speech, for sowing discord. That was the language used for some of his
Sarah,
speech.
he was also accused by security agents of opening fire on them, at least as the allegation goes, when they tried to arrest him in 2012. Let me bring Ahmed in, because for a very brief comeback on that.
Thank you, Sami, for correcting her.
You've got 30 seconds, though, Ahmed.
Okay, thank you, Sami, for correcting the guest about Nimr and Nimr. Listen, in Saudi Arabia, we do have a freedom of speech. If you want to just go after the program and go check on Twitter, everybody, they put their full name and they start, talking about different things about the monarchy and about, the branches of the government.
Okay.
Saudi Arabia has a freedom of speech. Saudi Arabia won't allow the freedom of speech if it's going to engage in terrorism. This is where we draw the line.
We're going to have to also draw the line now at the end of this show because we are out of time. Let's thank our guests very much, Ahmed al-Ibrahim, Leah Whitson and Joseph Kechichian. And thank you for watching. As always, you can leave your comments on the programme page of our website, aljazeera.com. You can post your views on facebook.com/AJ Inside Story or tweet us at AJ Inside Story. From me, Sami Zeidan, and all the team from here, for now, it's goodbye.